Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So today, we're diving into a really fascinating breakdown of how reaching a very specific five-figure milestone completely flips your daily existence on its head. Now, you might be thinking financial milestones are just, arbitrary numbers made up to make the rest of us feel inadequate. But actually, there is very real psychology and mathematics behind why certain amounts of money create dramatic shifts in your day-to-day life. And the first real game changer, it isn't $1 million. It's not even 100,000. It is $10,000. Today, we're going to unpack exactly how crossing this specific threshold shifts your mindset entirely from survival to opportunity. Okay, picture this. It's 3 a.m. You're lying awake, staring at the ceiling, and your mind is just racing through every possible financial disaster that could strike tomorrow. I mean, your car could break down, your laptop might just completely die on you, or worse, you could lose your job. Sounds a little too familiar, right? When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you are constantly playing defense with your money. Every single unexpected expense feels like an absolute catastrophe. But what if I told you that money can actually act as a biological intervention? Having that specific $10,000 safety net can essentially eliminate almost all of those midnight anxiety sessions. It gives you the power to actually make proactive choices about your future instead of just constantly bracing for impact.
Let's talk about the dreaded check engine light. We've all been there. If you have zero savings, that little light on your dashboard might as well be a countdown timer to financial disaster. You're immediately stressed out, right? Wondering if you're going to have to put it on a credit card or maybe awkwardly borrow money from family. But think about it. When you have 10 grand saved up, that exact same check engine light becomes just a mild inconvenience. Sure, you're annoyed, but you're not panicked. And that shift from pure, unadulterated panic to just being a little annoyed might seem small, but it is literally the absolute foundation of your overall financial well-being.
Living with that constant stress creates this hidden, heavy drain on your energy. It's called decision fatigue. Every single day, without even realizing you're doing it, you're making thousands of tiny financial calculations. Should I buy the generic pasta that kind of tastes like cardboard or splurge on the name brand? Should I dodge that $25 dinner with friends and, invent some creative excuse just so I don't blow my weekly budget? Every single one of these micro calculations burns mental energy. But the time you hit the pillow, you are completely exhausted from constantly calculating whether you can afford to simply exist. It's an invisible weight you drag around everywhere. And here is where the magic actually happens. 90%. When you finally have $10,000 sitting in the bank, 90% of those daily financial survival calculations just vanish. Poof. They become completely irrelevant. You aren't agonizing between generic and name brand pasta anymore because you're terrified of your bank balance. You're just choosing based on what you actually want to eat. Imagine just how much mental bandwidth you would free up if you didn't have to do survival math 50 times a day. It's this level of absolute freedom that most people honestly don't even realize they're missing out on until they finally experience it for themselves. Now, this reduction in decision fatigue isn't just about, good vibes and feelings. It actually alters your biology. Neuroscientists have found that financial security literally reduces your cortisol levels, and cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone. What this means is that hitting that $10,000 mark doesn't just change your bank account. It literally rewires how your physical body responds to everyday challenges. You actually stop operating in a constant, exhausting state of fight or flight. And removing that deep-seated biological stress, that unlocks a massive reservoir of mental and physical energy that you can now redirect toward actually improving your life. Which brings us to a concept financial experts call the emergency fund effect. But let's de-jargonize this for a second. The biggest benefit of having 10 grand doesn't actually come from spending it. It comes from the profound peace of mind just knowing the money is sitting there. Honestly, an emergency fund isn't really about the emergencies at all. Most people who build up 10 grand never actually spend it on a crisis. Instead, what happens is they mentally unlock the bandwidth to focus on opportunities. They invest in their education, start businesses, or just put all their focus into increasing their income, simply because they aren't losing sleep over their basic survival anymore. Let's ground all this psychology in some hard reality for a second. What does the safety net practically cover? Well, common automotive repairs usually run between $500 and $3,000. With 10 grand, you're totally covered. What about sudden medical care? The vast majority of urgent, unexpected trips fall well under $5,000. Handled.
But then there's sudden job loss, which is definitely the scariest one for most of us. Well, $10,000 gives you roughly 3 to 6 months of living expenses. That is actual breathing room. It gives you the time to be selective and find the right job, rather than desperately taking the very first offer just to make rent. Mathematically, this number makes you nearly immune to typical financial derailments. And because you're immune to those derailments, your options just completely multiply. Think about a $50 networking event. When you have zero savings, every single dollar feels incredibly precious because losing it brings you one step closer to disaster, so you skip the event. But the person with $10,000 saved? They go to that exact same event and might end up meeting someone who offers them a job paying $5,000 more a year. Having a safety net doesn't make you careless with your cash. It makes you perfectly positioned to invest in opportunities that broke people simply cannot afford to take a chance on. We call this breathing room. And frankly, it is the bedrock of all good financial decisions. When you aren't constantly gasping for financial air, you suddenly have the time and clarity to do things like shop around for better car insurance rates instead of just passively renewing. You can finally switch away from that ridiculously expensive phone plan without stressing over the upfront switching fees. You can confidently drop $2,000 on a career-boosting certification, or maybe even safely participate as a small investor in a friend's new business venture. It's a totally different ballgame. Having options feels incredibly different from having no options at all. Now, this creates such a fascinating contrast in mindsets. I bet you know people making six-figure salaries who drive flashy cars and eat $20 salads every day, but have absolutely zero in savings. Meanwhile, there's the person making $40,000 a year who has built up substantial savings. Why is that? Well, because the saver has mastered the most critical skill in wealth building. It isn't just about earning money, it's about keeping it. Reaching $10,000 is essentially a masterclass in delaying gratification. It proves you know how to distinguish between a want and a need, which, believe it or not, puts that $40,000 earner so much closer to true financial independence than the high earner living on the edge. And the transformation doesn't stop there. It spills over into these amazing hidden ripple effects. We already talked about how it lowers cortisol, but studies actually show people with savings report significantly better sleep and way less insomnia. On top of that, money stress is a massive cause of divorce and family conflict. Removing that stress makes you less irritable and way more present with your loved ones. And then there's the confidence factor. You walk into job interviews or negotiations completely differently when you don't desperately need the position to survive. You negotiate better compensation because you are operating from a foundation of solid confidence, not desperation. Okay, I hear you. You might be listening to this thinking, 10 grand, that sounds literally impossible right now. Let's be very real for a second. Saving your first $1,000 is absolutely brutal. It requires intense willpower and usually some pretty significant lifestyle changes. It is without a doubt the hardest part of the journey. But here's the incredible thing. Saving your second thousand is noticeably easier because you've already started building that financial muscle. By the time you're aiming for your fifth or 6,000, the process feels almost automatic. So pushing past that very first barrier is absolutely everything. And if you're wondering where on earth you're supposed to find that money, this little stat might motivate you. $3,000. That is the amount the average American spends annually just on coffee, dining out, and random convenience purchases. Yeah, those daily lattes really do add up. And that doesn't even touch major expenses. If you could intentionally redirect just 1/3 of that everyday spending toward your savings, you'd build a massive safety net surprisingly fast. The difference almost always comes down to simple awareness and intentionality, rather than your actual income level. Most of us have significantly more flexibility in our daily budgets than we realize. So, how do we actually make this happen? Let's build a quick, actionable roadmap. Step 1. Start ridiculously small. Seriously, we're talking $25 or $50 a month. Step 2 is all about consistency. The size of the contribution matters far less than the unwavering habit of saving something every single month, which leads right into Step 3, the identity shift. You aren't just going on some temporary financial diet here. You are fundamentally changing your identity from a spender to a saver. And once you truly see yourself as a saver, Step 4 kicks in naturally, compounding your new habits to tackle your next milestone and making wealth building almost inevitable. Which brings us to our final and probably the most important takeaway of this whole explainer. The person you become while saving your first $10,000 is infinitely more valuable than the money itself. 10 grand isn't just a number sitting in a bank account. It is a complete psychological transformation that proves to you, once and for all, that you are totally capable of achieving major financial goals. So if you're currently staring at a zero balance, don't panic. Start small today, stay beautifully consistent, and watch how this identity shift ripples into literally every single corner of your life. I'm going to leave you with this.
What could you achieve tomorrow if you knew you never had to worry about a $500 emergency ever again? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next